Je voulais que tout le monde puisse s'asseoir. Comme ça, on peut commencer les discussions de ces panels.
Microphone, please.
Mesdames et messieurs, mon nom est Georges Rebello Pietro-Chicotti.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Georges Rebello Chicotti, and I'm Secretary General of the OACPS. I'm going to moderate this panel. I would like to welcome all of the ministers who are going to be taking part in this panel. I'd like to remind them that they have 4 minutes. They will be discussing the topic that we have before us, which is heritage and cultural diversity in crisis. Now, before beginning, I have just been informed that the government of Germany has asked for a right of reply with respect to the intervention that was made at the end of the preceding panel. As such, I would give the floor to the representative of Germany for Germany's right of response before I give the floor to the first speaker of this panel. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Germany. I will be very brief in the respect of 1 minute time given to us. For us, we were shocked to be heard about the statement given by the delegation of Russia. We strongly condemn here on behalf of Germany, and I'm sure that this is also in line with many of our friends and the delegation of Ukraine, the war of aggression against Ukraine as a violation of international law. All of you know that UNESCO has identified damage to a total of almost 200 cultural sites and many religious buildings, museums, and historic buildings. This war is hitting Ukraine's cultural identity to the core, and we must not ignore this in this context of this World Conference of Cultural Policies. This aggression must end, and we condemn it in the strongest possible sense. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much for the 1 minute response of Germany. Your Excellencies, I will now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Velislav Minekov, Minister of Culture of the Republic of Bulgaria, and he has 4 minutes to make his presentation. I would like to remind the podium that Mr. Velislav Minekov will leave after his presentation because he is pressed by time. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, Madams and Sir, it's a great honor and privilege to be here with you today and to participate in the prestigious forum, the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, Mondiacult 2022. I turn first to our gracious host to express my gratitude for the excellent organization of the conference and the friendly atmosphere. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. The very message of the celebration, the next 50s, World Heritage as a source of resilience, humanity, innovation for future generations, shows an ambition based on the success achieved and implementation of this key international document. As a country with rich culture and natural heritage, Bulgaria continues to work actively on the main themes related to commemoration of this anniversary: climate change and heritage preservation, sustainable tourism and digital transformation, and many more. The objectives and themes of the discussions at this forum fully reflect the commitment of all parties to build the future of culture and vehicle for the sustainable harmonies of development of nations. In this sense, ensuring clear links with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Agreement is of most importance. That is why the starting point of my reflections on the topic day will be the cultural heritage and its contribution to achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The role of culture is achieving these goals, and driver of sustainable social, economic and environmental development is undeniable. With their potential to promote identity, inclusion, creativity and diversity, cultural policies effectively complement and enhance sustainable development strategies at both national and global levels. Today, however, we face more serious challenges and more frequently the climate crisis, the mass extinction of species and the COVID-19 pandemic represent existential threats and risk factors. Long-term risk management measures combined with planned policies, protection measures and good practice contribute to effective damage prevention and mitigation of the heritage conservation approach. An essential element in the integration of cultural policies and respective international sustainable development strategies, an important prerequisite is the exchange of information and good practices in integral part of the process of mutual dialogue, understanding and interaction. Support for initiatives that encourage the active participation of citizens, especially children and young people, cannot be overlooked either. Solidarity, mobilization, promoting cooperation, finding partners are needed, and this is where I see the key role of UNESCO and its member states as a global player in cultural heritage risk management. Cultural heritage can also be threatened by illicit trafficking and illegal trade in cultural property. Cooperation at all levels of government engagement, bilateral and multilateral dialogue between governments and the institutions of UNESCO, member states and other countries are important tools in the fight against illegal trafficking and the prevention of actions that endanger cultural heritage. Let me finally share a few words related to Bulgaria's cultural heritage and its efforts to promote its factor of sustainable development. Nearly 40,000 immovable cultural objects and more than 7 million movable cultural objects are registered in our country and are stored in museum funds and expositions. This is an enormous wealth and incredible resource that we must use wisely for sustainable development of our country. Well, my dear guests, I have to make shortages. And let me end with what I started with, the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. This unique international instrument, which embodies the universal desire to preserve heritage, has proved its vital testimony to the goodwill and solidarity for 50 years. And let our support for this global project continue, because the need, this convention affirming world heritage as a source of reconciliation, humanity and innovation. Thank you for your attention.
Je remercie Monsieur le ministre de la
Thank you very
Bulgarie.
much, Minister of Bulgaria. As I mentioned earlier, the minister will have to leave us early in view of his busy schedule, other commitments. And now I would introduce Mr. Hassan Nadem, Minister of Culture, Tourism and Antiquities of Iraq. You have the floor, sir.
شكرا سيد رئيس الجلسة. تحية لكم السيدات والسادة. وعندما نتذكر التنوع الثقافي موضوع هذه الجلسة يتبادر إلى الذهن اتفاقية العام 2005 التي انضم إليها العراق في العام 2013.
Conventions that the Iraq
لابد من أن أنوه بأن العراق
to say that Iraq and his own new policies and new constitution after 2003 give good and importance to the diversity and culture in Iraq, and it is a very diverse in terms of language, religion, and ethnicities. And I would like to remind that our ministry in Iraq has allocated a special section that is meant to work only with cultural diversity. That means the enrichment in this diversity and in the culture. That means it has to put a lot of policies to work with it. I have to work with the enhancement of cooperation between different countries in the Convention of 2005, because, as we say in Arabic, because one hand cannot clap. And as in English, what we say, it takes two to tango. Cultural diversity, dear gentlemen and ladies, it is very important for all countries, especially in Iraq, especially at the beginning of the history. And this is what the artifacts that we have explored throughout different times. When we've seen all these artifacts, and if you ever visit a museum in Iraq, you will see different kinds of arts, especially the Sumerian sculptures and Akkadian, Hadarian, and this is applicable to all of civilizations in Iraq and not only in Mesopotamia only. And with the exacerbating crisis in the world that led to human rights encroachments, especially what happened in Iraq with ISIS invasion and a lot of migration from Iraq to outside of Iraq, we've noticed that this can be only described as a disaster. We have to develop all these policies to work with these conventions that relate to the cultural diversity in 2005, and the other convention that deals with intangible culture and heritage in 1945, and the convention of that deals with protecting culture during conflict and armed conflict, and the one that also deals with protecting all the heritage. We have also to deal with working on the policies and local laws to deal with all the challenges, especially that lead or deals with human rights. We have to work on enforcement of all the applicable conventions. As we know, it's easy to say things, but it's difficult to translate those words into deeds. So, for example, the Convention of 1954, we did not really protect the heritage of Iraq and Syria. So also we have to renew the articles of Convention in 2003 that work with or articles because this intangible cultural it's very important for the diversity and for sustainable development, and the UNESCO enforced and enhanced that, and it worked in 1989, really emphasized on that. And also in Istanbul declaration that was adopted after the round table. There are a lot of common factors and that expresses the culture. However, the renewing, the illicit trafficking of the cultural properties and appropriation is very dangerous, because that will can be dealt with as a theft of the country's own heritage. And the person who does that, he doesn't really think about having his livelihood, but he wants to gain a lot of money. That's why we need to really follow the latest technologies to be part of our institutions. We also need to have a lot of coordination and cooperation between different countries to restitute distribute our artifacts and to work with the Interpol to have special training on any outlets from any country between borders. I would like to thank Mexico for hosting this important conference that we are attending, and I would like also to thank the UNESCO for all the efforts that it exerts for especially in the countries in crisis. And thank you.
Je remercie Monsieur le Ministre de la Culture.
I would like to thank the Minister of Culture of Iraq, and I would now like to welcome Madame Karim Assoum, representative of the Ministry of Culture of Palestine.
I would like to thank Mexico for hosting us here for this conference. I would like to apologize on behalf of the minister because he had some really serious circumstances. We are here to reconfirm after tough times that we lived, especially the COVID, that we have to protect these heritage because it is the solid ground in which we protect the culture. In Lebanon, we have a lot of cultures and diversity. This country that faces a lot of crises and still is in the mid of 70s of last decade, when the war threatened the civil or the national museum. There was a lot of cemented or walls that have concreted, and the mosaics and the sarcophagus, they were there. They were hopeful, and thankfully they were kept and remained intact. And within the same policies, Lebanon gave a priority to combat illicit trafficking in artifacts. Heritage is not for sale is a new campaign that Lebanon just operated, and people who came through Lebanon can see it just when they came from the airport. And this is serve a good reminder for the people inside Lebanon to remember that this is our national heritage that we're not supposed to sell. And Lebanon worked with the Interpol to restitute a lot of our artifacts, and yes, we were able to restitute 92 pieces, and we received some statues from New York that are more than 100 years ago. We were able to restitute a lot of, and we sent some of our pieces to Syria and Iraq also. We were able to contribute in this illicit trafficking because we understand the importance of cooperation and coordination between different countries. As also we know that there is a lot of threats that for the culture and the diversity because working with other countries, we learn a lot of how to work on conserving our culture. We learned also that culture remains a very important place and ground, especially after crisis. And this is what we witnessed after the port crisis that happened 2020. And UNESCO realized the depth of this crisis, and it's launched a campaign that put a lot of effort from the very first minute, and this initiative rehabilitated almost 250 schools and supported museums, art, and artists. And this is what we are trying to do these days, trying to build a stronger cultural sector that's able to work against those challenges and find and reach to the SDGs at 2030. We understand that the culture is for all times. Lebanon is one of the countries that were the founders of the UN and is always able and try to be on time for everything.
Thank you very much, Madam, in representation of the Ministry of Culture of Palestine. 4 minutes is the time allotment that we all have. And now I would introduce His Excellency, Mr. Simonas Kairis, Minister of Culture of Lithuania.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Minister for Culture of Lithuania, European continent. It is my honor and pleasure to address you at this conference. Thank you, Mexico and UNESCO together, for all your successful efforts of organizing this important conference. We live in times of global challenges: COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, increasing frequency of natural disasters, crises and armed conflicts affecting cultural heritage and cultural diversity across the globe. All this requires our timely and resolute action. Dear colleagues, in the 21st century, we learn again that one single mind is enough to shatter all the architecture of peace. And I'm talking not only about Europe, I'm talking about the whole world. It is more than 7 months since Russia launched its illegal, unprovoked, and unjustifiable military aggression against Ukraine. Thousands of lives lost, entire cities devastated in this imperialistic war. Hundreds of cultural objects have been destroyed. Ukrainian cultural heritage collections preserved in museums, cultural institutions, libraries are under serious threat of being looted or destroyed by Russian military forces. Russia's war against Ukraine is ongoing blatant violation of international law, the core principles of the United Nations Charter, as well as UNESCO Constitution and its provisions of cultural rights. Russia broke, inter alia, its obligations to protect cultural property under the 1954 Hague Convention and respect the cultural heritage of others under the UNESCO's 1970 Convention. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia's war in Ukraine has shown that ratification of the second protocol of the Hague Convention needs to be debated and strongly encouraged. As well as robust capacities and skills are needed, preventive measures should be enhanced to protect cultural heritage. Since the start of the war, many countries welcomed and took care of Ukrainian refugees. It is an act of humanity and solidarity. But now we need to hear and to do what Ukraine asks us for. They ask to help the Ukrainians in Ukraine because they want to live in their own country. They want to return. They need our collective help to achieve this. We need to protect and safeguard Ukrainian cultural heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, every United Nations member must respect the rules of international order we have been creating through decades. But I have a few questions for you. Can we tolerate a member of the international community in a war of destructive lies and cynicism? Can a country that brutally destroys and threatens cultural heritage of another sovereign country still chair the World Heritage Committee? It undermines the principles, reputations, and credibility of UNESCO. War is not a natural disaster. Every war has its owner. Every war has its own butcher and own butcher. It is time to stop this, and every of us now has to choose the right side of the history for our and for future generations. I call the international community to make joint efforts to force the aggressor to end the war in Ukraine. The Russian war in Ukraine must stop now. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini!
Merci. Merci. Je remercie messieurs les ministres de la Lituanie et j'annonce maintenant.
I'd like to thank the minister from Lithuania, and I would now like to welcome.
Je voudrais maintenant annoncer Son Excellence Monsieur
His Excellency, Mr. Atef Abu Saif, Minister of Culture of Palestine. You have the floor, sir.
Chairman, my fellow ministers, as I address the heritage in crisis, I shall address the challenges we face as Palestinians from the last occupation of our time to our coordinated responses to the several challenges we face at national and global level. Our last Edward Said, which I know most of you are familiar with, calls this defiant memory. In spite of dramatic socio-political circumstances, Palestinian ministries, alongside several Palestinian non-governmental, semi-governmental organizations, are struggling today to protect the material remains of the past. As history is considered the main container of identity, nations are rewriting their history in order to explain and adapt contemporary developments, events, and phenomena in order to employ them in the challenges facing the society. I recall the historic moment on 31st October 2011 when UNESCO General Conference voted to admit Palestine as a member state by a large majority. In this context, the UNESCO bid was part of a wider Palestinian campaign to obtain full international recognition as a state within the United Nations system. Consequence of UNESCO's recognition of Palestine as a member state consisted in its opening up the possibility for the Palestinians to request their most significant heritage sites to be considered for inscription on the World Heritage List. We succeeded by today to inscribe 3 properties on the World Heritage List: Birthplace of Jesus, Church of Nativity, Hebron, the old city of and the old city of Batir. We have 14 sites on the tentative list, and we commit with the state of conservation of the properties and submit its obligated reports. Palestine's rich cultural heritage, religious importance, and tourism is one of the most important sectors for substantial development. It has high economic and social potential. We have realized the role played by intangible cultural heritage in the social, cultural, and economic aspects of life, but also the dangers threatening its viability and continuity, identity and belonging, which made Palestinians aware of the need to fill the gap that exists between the threats they are facing due to Israeli occupation and the possibility offered by UNESCO treaties and international cooperation instruments in this respect. Therefore, our Minister of Culture tries to best utilize the capacity of Palestinian young women, experts, and NGOs to safeguard, promote, and preserve the cultural identity and their belonging. As we believe that Palestinian living heritage is a source of community-based resilience, which deeply rooted in the strong consciousness and connection of Palestinian sense of national cultural identity and its continuity. By today, we have inscribed 4 elements to the UNESCO representative list, and we have another 4 elements are ongoing domination. Safeguarding Palestinian living heritage, which eventually can be a driver for sustainable development in many ways. For instance, to see living heritage as a wellspring of solutions to eradicate poverty and hunger, to create decent and great green jobs. Moreover, through culture, we try to throw off the yoke of occupation. Israel, which occupies our land, is the biggest theft in the history, is the biggest theft of heritage in history. It steals our heritage, antiquities, and remains. Every stone in Palestine is subject to be stolen. History witnessed lots of examples of colonial powers stealing the antiquities from the colonies. But in our case, the theft, which is the occupation, Israel, does not only steal the antiquities, but also the history behind these antiquities, the narrative and the national tales which is associated with them. The theft steals antiquities and the history together. The Israeli occupation made changes to these findings and forced them to fit a different narrative which they don't tell. We, international community, fight illicit trafficking, I hear this word a lot in this conference, of the antiquities. But what we are doing to do with the state-organized crimes and thefts of the antiquities. Last month, our historical city of Nablus, which our ancestors lived continuously since 5,000 years ago, was subject to destruction and military attacks. Can you imagine that you attack buildings 100 years old and destroy them? Same thing happened in the holy shrines in Hebron, where not only the historical places are stolen, but also we are prevented from practicing our belief in them. You should recall the attack against the last journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, funeral in the church inside the church in Jerusalem. In our belief, in our beloved city, Jerusalem, both the Christian and Muslim shrines are attacked and properties are confiscated from there. In every assault against Gaza, scores of historical places are attacked by plane and bombs. Rich human history is attacked with no thought of the loss this makes to our shared history. Canaanite, Phoenician, Byzantium, Romanian, Christian, Muslim, all the places are vanished. Nobody cares. Since its occupation of Palestine, Israel intended to destroy our old towns and villages and steal monuments and antiquities. Most of the museums in Israel are filled with antiquities that belong to us, with our grandfathers' belonging. As well, our non-tangible heritage is not safe. The clothes of our grandmothers were confiscated during the Nakba, alongside our homes and properties. This is the time, the Nakba, when my grandmother Aisha was forced to leave her beautiful house in Jaffa and became a refugee in Gaza. The Israeli occupation is the most dangerous to human heritage. If we want to protect the rich human heritage in the Holy Land, in order to keep it available for the future and for us, you have to act against the occupation. This is not a political statement. It is a very cultural and human one. As you see, we fight at more than one battle at the same time. We strive to keep what we can of this heritage away from the hands of the Israeli military, and at the same time, we take actions to make it available to our children. Over the last few decades, the world has witnessed the emergence of global challenges whose scope and complexity have urged countries to reshape their public policy, which has direct impact on the cultural sector. Though in Palestine we are in the most tense situation, like in the time of a crisis that we have been living with the pandemic, being under occupation, land fragmentation and by Israel, and such as brutal violence against the Gaza Strip, we have been doing our best to do all of this. However, these efforts face only one challenge: the Israeli occupation. With the silence of the international community, silence which doesn't say a word against what Israel is doing, not against our heritage, it's against your heritage. This is a human heritage, international heritage, where all the religious, which you all believe in, flourish there. With your silence and with your inability to act to safeguard this human heritage in Palestine, our culture will remain in danger. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister of Palestine, and I give the floor to His Excellency, the Minister Ernesto Villegas Polyak, Minister of Culture for Venezuela. Good afternoon. The speech by the Minister of Culture of Palestine has really had an effect on me, has really impacted me. His grandmother had to move away from her natural habitat for reasons beyond her control. My mother, with her family of a Jewish origin, was born in Croatia, in Zagreb, also had to emigrate because of the horrible effect of fascism and Nazism. We have to eradicate these phenomena that make it possible, that made possible in the 20th century and now in the 21st. Similar things, our solidarity with the Palestine people, with our brethren in Puerto Rico. We expressed our solidarity with them. And so now, without further introduction, I would like to give my support from A to Z. The speech at the beginning of this panel by Ms. Beatriz Gutierrez Mueller, not this panel, but this conference, in representation of her husband, the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, a fantastic piece that expresses what the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela aspires to, and I would dare to say that it's what most of Latin America aspires to. So, and I would say that the same in representation of the President of Venezuela. So the Republic is part of the topic of this meeting. The global culture. We talk about global things, and we mention it with a certain amount of doubt because globalization is really failing, and humanity, that's what they're seeing. We're seeing how in Europe, we're seeing that the very existence of human existence is hanging by a thread in Europe, and its causes have its roots in culture. We prefer to say common as opposed to global because we don't believe in that globalization as a panacea that was offered and that has led to negative effects. Now, we interpret that slogan with the aspiration that it should be translated into practical actions to protect heritage and cultural diversity of the evils that are assaulting it in the world of today. So that's why we dare to say that since 1954, there is a convention, a UNESCO convention for the protection and safeguarding of heritage and cultural diversity in the event of armed conflict. UNESCO should also have an instrument, some mechanism to protect and safeguard the intangible cultural heritage and the tangible and cultural diversity from the measures and unilateral coercive measures and the so-called sanctions that are daily applied against countries in the world by powerful nations, excluding them from international financial mechanisms and making it impossible to the commercialization of products that generate national income on which cultural dynamics depend in our country. The Republic of Venezuela has been a victim of these measures. 961 coercive and unilateral measures have unfortunately affected the exercising of cultural cultural rights in our country. But there are estimates that half of the people in our countries are subject to coercive sanctions in one way or another. And if culture, or the cultures as we prefer to refer to them in plural, are a global public good, then it's not something that has to do with the citizens or countries. It's something that affects all of humanity, all of mankind. So we have to have effective mechanisms to safeguard the cultural rights of the people in the event of conventional arms conflicts and also in the event of non-conventional wars, such as the ones that are typical of the current time right now. I was saying at a breakfast this morning I was talking about the Latin American space where there was a Netflix, there's an international corporation, and it says, yes, it's very interesting because it's unusual for the president of a corporation like that to be in an event such as this. And I have with me the experience that UNESCO developed 40 years ago when Salman Bray was the Chancellor of Ireland. He proposed an initiative which then, at that time, was undeniable, and it was analogical and incipient to the overrunning phenomenon of communication today. There are hegemonic powers today, global powers, that implement mechanisms that undermine our people and that go against cultural diversity. And we have proposed that UNESCO should go back to that McBride report, who developed a study 40 years ago. If at that time it was a necessity when there was barely just some news agencies and some satellites, just imagine how necessary it is today for UNESCO and the international community to stop looking elsewhere and to see the power that these conglomerates exercise. There is the Minister of Palestine who's talking about what they have had to suffer, and there's the reason for the disinformation of the xenophobic and racism and supremacy phenomena that unfortunately have flourished in our contemporary world. Today, we express our backing or support of the Convention of the Illicit Traffic of Cultural Goods of 1970. We have moral authority. In 2018, we returned 198 pieces to Costa Rica, which in Venezuela, they were going to be exported just as merchandise. Venezuela returned all of those archaeological pieces. And also the repatriation of a sacred stone that for 20 years was in the Metropolitan Park of Berlin and outside of the reach of the indigenous peoples. And thanks to the measures of Venezuela and in accordance with the government of Germany, we repatriated this piece at the beginning of the pandemic in April 2020. We've just received from the Italian Republic a small but very important archaeological piece that was confiscated by the Carabinieri and was going to be sold like merchandise. That piece, which to us is a fundamental part of our cultural heritage, so we ratify our support of this convention and our commitment to this convention. And I will conclude by saying the following. From 10 to 20 November, there will be in the city of Caracas the 18th International Fair, Literature or Book Fair in Venezuela. This is the biggest cultural event in Venezuela. This time, we don't have for the first time, we have a whole continent as our guest of honor, which is the entire continent of Africa. And in this context of reivindication, of the claiming of our African roots, we have discovered that in our deposits and in our vaults, we have a sample of Congolese art that was given to Venezuela by the terrible King Leopold. It was a result of the plundering, and it was given to Venezuela. We are removing those pieces from the deposits and the vaults, and we're going to be exhibiting them with all of the respect that they deserve in our Museum of Fine Arts. And we offer to our brothers and sisters in Congo the possibility of repatriating these pieces. If Congo wants them, they can have them. What King Leopold stole from them, Venezuela returns with great pleasure, knowing that it's part of its cultural heritage. And it isn't a problem of the Congo and Africa, it's a problem of mankind, if it's true that culture is a global public good. Thank you very much. I thank His Excellency, the Minister of Venezuela. We have finished with the member states, the speeches by the member states, but we have one observer, and therefore I'd like to introduce Mr. Alejandro Camacho Gonzalez, who is the Vice President of the International Council of Folklore, Festivals and Folk Art. So you have 2 minutes to make your remarks. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Madam and Mr. Ministers. Good afternoon to everyone. Cultural diversity and heritage have always been at serious risk. If the governments and civil organizations, we don't join forces to face the economic and social problem that culture is suffering, and we run the risk of a cultural pandemic. I represent the International Council of Organizations for Folklore Festivals and Folk Art, which is an NGO created in France in 1970 and currently is an official partner of UNESCO and accredited by the PCI Committee of UNESCO. This is the agency, the largest folklore agency in the world. At CIOF, we are convinced that we need to create public policies that will lead us so that culture will be a sustainable development goal. In our organization, we're sure of the need for culture to be a good and a right not for all human beings in any part of the world, and not just for the artists, the elite artists, but also to the creators of culture, even in the smallest communities, so that we can highlight its importance as a source of intangible cultural heritage for all of the peoples of the world. We offer our cultural capital with thousands and thousands of voluntaries of CIOF who participate during the whole year in over 350 festivals throughout the world, so that together with UNESCO, the governments, and civil society, we strengthen the culture and we can achieve the sustainable development of which we speak so much. Thank you to UNESCO and to the Mexican government for giving voice to non-governmental organizations. Many thanks for your attention. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have reached the conclusion of this panel. I think that in terms of conclusion, we can take away that the different panelists mentioned recognition of the important role that UNESCO has played in the organization of Mondiacult, and especially the government of Mexico, who has welcomed us here. This panel also mentioned other important aspects, because there are various countries on this panel that have been affected. We have heard, therefore, that there's the will that show that in the face of conflicts, it's necessary for powerful nations and who invade other countries that they have to take into account of the cultural reality and cultural heritage of those countries. I also consider that there are countries who mentioned or evoked the challenge that they have to have a sustainable development policy when they're in a situation of conflict, where part of the country is occupied or there's a conflict where there don't seem to be any policies. Whether it's Palestine, Iraq, or Lebanon, they all mentioned extremely important aspects, and I think that the global community should work on these to build peace around the world as a way for all of us to develop and to conserve the cultural heritage. I also think it's important to evoke that what Venezuela said about the recovery and restitution of lost heritage and cultural property. We can conclude that states are making enormous efforts so that all of this cultural property and heritage be preserved and be taken into account in our sustainable development strategies. I think it's not easy to manage those sorts of policy, especially when you have a country that's both in conflict and occupied, and who must fix all of the problems that affect the cultural sector, and therefore also other policies or the politics. And so I think that our ideas that the global community can support, and at the level of UNESCO, we can try to be more just towards the countries who are facing these sorts of realities where global policies or local policies do not take into account the will of the people at a local level. I think there are many ideas here, but I think there's an important dimension or aspect that has to do with the political realities of specific countries, and I think there's a fairly important assertion that conflicts must end, whether it's in Palestine or in Iraq, that we can all work to build peace that will enable the countries to develop policies for the sustainable development of their country and their peoples. So those are some elements that we can take away as regards the various remarks that were made or speeches that were made. And I think that UNESCO's role is, of course, recognized as an organization that was able to bring us together today and which continues to work for the conservation of global cultural heritage. Thank you.